Joining us now is Caleb Maupin, political analyst and founder of the Center for Political Innovation. Welcome to the show, Caleb.
Sure, glad to be here.
So let's start with President Trump is going to make deliver a speech from the White House at 9 p.m. tonight. Can you anticipate what he might be talking about? I certainly know that it's a review of the past year's so-called achievements. Do you think he might make a declaration of war against Venezuela?
Well, at this point, when it comes to Venezuela, it's already been made clear that they are, at this point, trying to impose an oil blockade. They want to prevent Venezuela from exporting any oil. And that has been announced, and that's already been made clear, the strategy. Now, at this point, there are some concerns. There are different theories floating around about what the end game might be. It may be that they just want to sustain this oil blockade and just starve Venezuela to the point that you get societal collapse. It may be that they do want to actually move in to Venezuela and fracture the country and seize the Orinoco Belt, which is the oil-rich region. And that may be the strategy, is to break the country apart and have the oil-rich region come under a government that is under U.S. domination. But that is all unclear. It's not clear what Trump is going to talk about tonight. I will say this. His approval ratings are in the tank. He is not doing very, very well. He has not delivered, and much of his base are angry with him. It is people who voted for him who are disappointed with him. If he was only unpopular with Democrats, he'd be fine. But he's unpopular with the very people who voted for him, largely because he promised to end the wars and he promised to fix the economy. And he has done neither of those things. He has bombed Iran. He's now threatening war against Venezuela. And prices are still through the roof. And this Venezuela activity is driving oil prices up. And that's one thing that is not being widely commented on in the media. Venezuela is an oil-rich, oil-exporting country. And if you take away a country's ability to export oil, what happens? It's the basic law of supply and demand. The oil price goes up because there's oil scarcity. And that is the ultimate result of this at the moment. Oil prices are rising. Gas prices are rising. That cost is going to be passed on to consumers. And we're already being hit with inflation. It's going to get even worse. Every product you buy is delivered by a truck, and that truck is fueled by gasoline. And when you cut an oil-rich nation like Venezuela out of the world economy and create oil scarcity, the gas prices go up, and that cost gets passed on to the consumer.
So this blockade that they've started, how is this possible under international law? I mean, isn't it unlawful without congressional authorization or a UN mandate?
It's completely illegal, yes. I mean, the USA has basically just decided we're going to prevent Venezuela from selling their oil on the international markets because we don't like them. There is absolutely no legal basis for it. Trump, in his tweet announcing it, said that Venezuela is going to have to return all the oil, land, and assets they've seized from the United States. What in the world is he talking about? How has Venezuela ever taken any American oil, any American assets, or any American land? What in the world? I mean, it's like one of the most crazy tweets I've ever seen. How did Venezuela steal American land? What in the world is he talking about? The whole thing is completely crazy. It is completely illegal under international law. It's completely illegal under U.S. law, and that's been said by Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, and others. This is completely not a legitimate action on the part of the United States. The USA has absolutely no authority to tell Venezuela whether or not they can export oil.
We're seeing some dissent coming from GOP lawmakers. You've got Graham saying today that he wants to know what the plan is. If it's to do a regime change, that's not being discussed. Do those sort of statements undermine the drug interdiction justification that we've heard so far if regime change is the real objective?
Well, exactly, right? Like that. Supposedly this is all about drugs. But now we're messing with the oil industry, and Venezuela's allies have been saying all along this is about oil. And now that the USA has seized an oil tanker and is now announcing they will seize any other oil tankers, it's pretty clearly about oil. And the oil prices will rise and are rising because of this. And it's looking like Trump is kind of showing the argument of the Venezuelan government to be correct, that this is about oil. And that Venezuela is a very, very oil-rich country in South America. And the basis of their economic independence has been taking control of their oil resources and using state-run oil resources to build up the economy. And that's why Hugo Chavez was very popular. And that's why they had so many problems starting in 2014 when the oil prices dramatically dropped after the death of Hugo Chavez. And that's why they had the food crisis, that was imposed on them. There was a dramatic oil price drop. Then the USA imposed dramatic, crippling sanctions that made it very difficult for them to import any basic commodities. And so it's all about oil. And, Trump seems to be proving that it's all about oil.
Right. An oil expert, Francisco Monaldi, says that 80% of Venezuela's oil exports go to China, while 15 to 17% go to the US via Chevron. So how is this, you mentioned the price going up, but what about how will this affect China-US relations?
Well, China is an oil importing country, and that has been the basis of a lot of U.S. activity in the South China Sea and elsewhere, is that China's weakness is it depends on foreign oil. It needs oil to run its economy. China has the world's largest industrial base. They have, they produce half of the steel on the planet. They produce the world's, largest amount of computer chips. And you go down the line, China produces like you wouldn't believe. At this point, China has the world's largest telecommunications manufacturer. They have very, very little oil that is domestically produced. So the South China Sea is where oil comes to China via oil tankers. And that is why China has a large military presence in the South China Sea, is they want to make sure that those oil tankers don't stop. And that's also why China was key in negotiating a reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, is because both countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, send oil to China. And China needs that oil, and so China was able to get the two countries to reconcile. Venezuela is an ally of China. Venezuela has received a lot of Chinese military equipment in the last few months to prepare for any invasion or threat from the United States. And this is certainly going to impact China's ability to import oil. And this could be related to U.S.-China relations, absolutely, because of that. If China's ability to import oil, if they cannot import oil via the South China Sea, the lights go off on the Chinese mainland. That's why they have militarized the South China Sea so effectively, is because they need to make sure those oil tankers come in. So yes, cutting off China's ability to receive Venezuelan oil is going to hurt the Chinese economy. China is probably going to respond and consider this to be an attack on them, not just an attack on Venezuela.
Maduro's government said it will denounce the situation before the United Nations. Realistically, what leverage does Venezuela have at the UN, and what diplomatic or military escalations could follow this standoff?
Well, the thing is, Venezuela is in a bit of a stronger position because Trump is the president. When Obama was president, Venezuela was very isolated. A lot of Venezuela's friends and allies, people that didn't like the Bush administration, had been friendly to Hugo Chavez, et cetera. But now, because Trump is doing this, you have, for example, Petro, the leader of Colombia, who's promised to militarily defend Venezuela with the Colombian military. Now, that is completely unheard of. Colombia is generally considered a long-time United States stronghold in the region. But yet, Colombia is supporting Venezuela at this point. And there's a lot of voices in the international community that are supporting Venezuela because it's Trump who is doing this. Trump is doing this in ways that, I think the prevailing feeling among the globalist institutions and the World Economic Forum and the major powers in the world, that are opposed to Russia and China is they would like to get rid of the Venezuelan government. Trump is moving against Venezuela in ways that are erratic, that are affecting the international markets and affecting international relationships that are not kind of done in the consensus of the NATO coalition. And just like there was kind of widespread opposition to Bush's invasion of Iraq, right? Britain supported it, but then the rest of the NATO countries were pretty much opposed. We're seeing a similar kind of situation, which actually plays into Venezuela's favor. They're likely to get a lot more support at the United Nations than they would normally get.
And what about the public? Where is the public on all of this? I've seen one or two protests, but nothing substantial.
Well, the polls show the American people are opposed to this conflict. I will say the reason that the hands-off Venezuela protests are very small is because they are dominated by the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Brian Becker and the Answer Coalition, they kind of have a monopoly on the permits in Washington, D.C., and they maintain a monopoly over the protest movement, and they are determined to turn hands-off Venezuela protests into Stop Trump rallies. when it is actually the dissident MAGA, the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Rand Pauls and the Thomas Masseys that are the most important voice opposing the war right now. There were Hands Off Venezuela rallies in Los Angeles and Hands Off Venezuela rallies across the country. And if you looked at them, the signs you couldn't even see signs about Venezuela. All the signs just said, no ICE, no kings. Brian Becker is on a mission to turn any Hands Off Venezuela protest into a no kings, stop Trump rally. That's what he's doing, and it's that misleadership that is causing a problem. The Rage Against the War Machine protests that happened in 2023, on February 19th of 2023, were very, very important. That was where you had both leftists, left-wing voices like Dennis Kucinich and Chris Hedges, alongside conservatives, people like Tulsi Gabbard, people like Judge Napolitano, and that was really, really important. And, that was a big step forward. The dissident MAGA base, the people in New York City, the 1 in 10 Mamdani voters that was also a Trump voter, that's the most important constituency in America right now. And the Party for Socialism and Liberation and the Answer Coalition basically consider all those people to be racists. They advocate violence against them openly. They consider them to be fascists. They want to make sure that basically the Hands Off Venezuela rallies just look like no kings liberal mobilizations. And they are holding back what is a movement that represents the overwhelming public opinion in the country right now. People just don't want a new war against Venezuela.
Right. If we could just switch in the time that we have left, we've got about 8 minutes. Where are we with any kind of peace deal between Russia and Ukraine? For a while there, about a week ago, it looked like we might actually have a deal that people were all talking to each other, and but it seems to have softened. The atrocities still keep going on between Ukraine and Russia. Drone strikes continue. What's happening there? Well,
today the Russian Ministry of Defense came forward and just kind of laid the facts on the table. In this year alone, the year of 2025, Ukraine has lost 500,000 people. Almost 500,000 people have died in Ukraine. They have run out of old men to drag off the streets. They are talking about lowering the draft age even lower. I mean, it's Ukraine is done, and Russia is winning huge military victories on the battlefield, and the loss of human life in this conflict is colossal. So many lives have been lost, and at this point, the United States seems determined, on some level, the Trump administration does want to end the war, but Europe is not interested, and it is the European Union that is resisting like crazy, under the direction largely of the British. The British and the European Union countries are determined to prevent an end to this war. They want it to keep going. And we've seen a lot of anger rising in the European countries in particular. For example, the German leadership, the German chancellor has been widely called out for his irresponsible statements, et cetera. And we see the rise of the Alternative for Germany party and others. But, I mean, as of now, since the beginning of the year of 2025, 500,000 Ukrainians dead. This is particularly outrageous. Now, right now, a lot of very friendly gestures are being made toward Russia, and to Belarus, I must say. Lukashenko of Belarus is speaking very positively about the Trump administration, and there have been some prisoner exchanges and negotiations, not just between the United States and Russia, but also between the United States and Belarus. Belarus is a key ally of Russia on the battlefield. But at the moment, a lot of nice things are being said. The new national security strategy is critical of the logic of NATO, et cetera. But the war is still going on. The war needs to end because Russia's already won the war. And that corruption investigation, I think that is a key factor because the corruption of the Zelensky government, the facts are there about how they've been, pilfering off the money and taking care of their inner circle. And I believe part of the reason that the European governments are so resistant to ending the war is because a corruption investigation, it's not just Zelensky himself and his cronies that are going to be implicated. There are all kinds of European leaders that are involved in that whole thing. I mean, we remember some of the scandals with Hunter Biden and other things. There are lots of Western leaders that are involved in Ukrainian corruption, and they're very afraid of what happens if the conflict ends and, the receipts are shown and the Zelensky government has to account for a lot of the money that was pumped into Ukraine. And that's an important thing that can't be forgotten.
Right, and why are the British interested in sustaining it in a way that they're less vulnerable than for any kind of spillover like the rest of Europe?
Oil and natural gas. I mean, we're back to where we were before. That at this point, the European mainland, they buy their oil largely from British and American oil companies, and they buy their natural gas from British and American natural gas companies. The first thing that was done, you'll remember when the conflict in Ukraine escalated toward Russia's special military operation in 2022, was the Nord Stream pipeline was blown up because Germany was on the brink of starting to buy its natural gas from Russia. And that was going to be a huge loss for the Wall Street, London, oil and natural gas monopolies. And that, it just makes logical sense for Germany or Belgium or other countries to get their natural gas from Russia and not from America, not from Britain. It just, geographically, you look at a map, it's a lot cheaper to get your natural gas from Russia. But that represents a huge loss in profits.
Right, and in the time that we have less, this Foreign Agents Registration Act, what is it, and what's the campaign that you're trying to do to overturn it?
Well, the Foreign Agents the Foreign Agents Registration Act is a piece of legislation that goes back to 1937. That is basically, it's one of the most vaguely written laws ever. It's essentially a threat on anyone who advocates peace or advocates on behalf of a government the American state doesn't like. And the Uhuru Solidarity Coalition, made up of the defendants in the Uhuru case, the African People's Socialist Party, 3 of their leaders were indicted under it by the Biden administration. They had a trial in federal court. They were found not guilty of being foreign agents, but they were convicted of conspiracy. They have launched an effort to try and get this law overturned on the basis of the fact that it's not constitutional. The law does not define what being a foreign lobbyist amounts to. It doesn't clearly state what it means to be a foreign lobbyist. And in their case, their foreign lobbying was having some web conferences. Their foreign lobbying was publishing articles about the Ukraine conflict. And that's what they used to go after this black socialist organization in Florida and in St. Louis, Missouri. And they targeted them with this law and dragged them into federal court. They have led the effort to try and overturn this law. Now, Scott Ritter's home was raided by the Biden administration under the guise of the FARA law, though, the administration changed and Biden wasn't in office. And so Scott Ritter was not prosecuted, but it appeared that the Biden administration was looking to prosecute Scott Ritter under this law, and that the Foreign Agents Registration Act is so vaguely worded that basically, they can argue that you are an agent of some country, and on the basis of that, send you to prison for 15 years. It's a very dangerous piece of legislation, and I am really proud that my organization, the Center for Political Innovation, is going to be involved in the efforts to get the Foreign Agents Registration Act law overturned, because it was a law that was basically unused until the Biden years, and they started using it largely to go after Trump and his associates, but then also to go after anti-war activists and others. The law needs to be overturned. It's a bad piece of legislation. It
sounds like the Espionage Act, which was also brought to life under the Obama administration. But why was it first introduced? What was going on at the time?
Well, it was originally introduced because of the fact that the Roosevelt administration, it was moving in a very anti-German, anti-Nazi direction, which was, obviously good to do. And there were a lot of lobbyists and people involved in American industries who were tied to the Germans, and it was kind of a threat on the people in American politics that were sympathetic to the Nazis. However, they never used it against any Nazis. It was just a threat. And even that admits it's a political law. It's not a law. It was written to be a political law to target certain people. It was not written as a piece of legislation to just enforce the law. It was never used against any Nazis. They invoked it against W.E.B. Du Bois, the great African-American scholar, in the 1950s, alleging that he was a foreign agent of the Soviet Union. And they invoked it against the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and the unification movement in the 1970s, though they never used that. They ultimately, imprisoned Reverend Moon for tax charges. But it wasn't really until the Russiagate investigations they started using that law, because it is so vague, but the penalties are so extreme if you're convicted under it, that it's very much a way to get people to plea bargain. And many Trump administration officials who were charged under FARA immediately plea bargained and turned over everything. because they didn't want to risk going to prison for 15 years for allegedly being a foreign agent. They used it against a number of the people that were involved in the Russiagate investigation. And after that, we saw the Biden administration start to invoke it wildly against all kinds of people, including the Uhuru movement.
Right. Caleb, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon and for your take on Venezuela, Russia, Ukraine, and a campaign to scrap the FARA laws. Thank you very much for your comments.
Sure thing. Talk to you soon.